Good evening.
Good evening.
Well, we have an art gallery. But they're not here to display my art or my etchings. These represent a very startling fact. This here is Jewish. This comes from the Hebrew faith. And this over here, that is white jade from a temple in India. And this is from Siam, dug up some hundreds of years ago. This piece is a very delicate piece of carved ivory from India. And this over here is a piece of carved ivory from Siam. And this next is bronze from Burma. No, this is Burma, excuse me, the ivory. That is Burma, this is Tibet, this is Siam. And this piece is our good friend Lao Tzu of China, sitting backwards on a horse. And this figure is Jesus Christ on a crucifix. And this is our very, very great teacher. This is the Buddha of Tibet, the man who brought the Tibetan Buddhism to Tibet, founded the great order there, and it is his spirit that is supposed to incarnate, reincarnate, in the Dalai Lamas down through the ages, right to this present. One is supposed to have the spirit of that fellow. And over here, we have a very unique book. This is the life of Christ in Chinese, from the Annunciation all the way back through to the Ascension. And little Jesus has slant eyes and very oriental features, and even Mary and the big Jesus and Joseph, they are all neatly pictured in Chinese characters. In other words, what you are seeing here might be called symbolism. But here is to me the mystery. Each one of these items represents man's highest religious concept. In other words, most of us, of course, are trained not to try to visualize God. But the average person finds that very difficult. And so it is that the Hebrew visualizes God as the law. And so we have in this tiny little silver case the Ten Commandments. The Hebrews, as you know, do not personalize God and do not have a personal Savior, and so their highest concept of God is the law. And there it is, the Ten Commandments in a tiny case. Now, this, of course, in all Roman Catholic religious art, you will find God, the one supreme God, creator of the earth and all that is therein, usually pictured either on a crucifix, dying or dead, or being lifted off the crucifix bleeding, or laid on the ground after the crucifixion, or in some other form of great sorrow and tragedy. That is the Roman Catholic's highest concept of God. Many Protestants have the same idea, but I would say that most of them visualize the Master in a gentle, living, peaceful way. You usually see the Master as a shepherd or with sheep, or as one picture I have upstairs, sitting at the well with the woman of Samaria, and you can see his face is sweet and gentle, loving. He's finding no sin in her at all, but he's explaining the secret of life to her, knowing full well her human history of 5 husbands and a lot of men who weren't husbands. So that in most of the Protestant faiths you have the symbolism of, if it isn't God, it is that which is next to God, the Christ or Son of God, or highest spiritual religious concept, the gentle, loving, compassionate Jesus. Now, just think, though, that every one of these countries also symbolizes their concept of their highest religious entity, Buddha. And whether it is the Tibetan Buddha, the Siamese Buddha, the Burmese Buddha, Hindu Buddha, nevertheless, you have in the art and literature of these people the symbolic representation of their highest religious ideal. The people of China of this particular era, 550 BC, that is, the very few people who surrounded Lao Tzu, had one of the highest concepts of all, one that was so impossible for them ever to visualize that there is no concept of their deity whatsoever, and so we have merely a figure of their teacher representing the teaching. The teaching itself says that man must be in control of his senses. Otherwise, his senses are in control of him, and he no longer has dominion, and he's no longer a man. He's a parody. And so the object of his teaching was to attain through silence and stillness a dominion over the senses, and sitting backwards on a horse, and usually a wild horse, represents that control. It means that he can sit backwards on a horse and it can't do anything to him. He has as perfect control as if he had the reins and was sitting the other way around. He's at peace, and the horse has no power to do anything but stand there. Now, in the early stages of spiritual study, an individual is more or less bound to his old religious concepts of God, of the Christ, of spiritual man, of spiritual being, just as he is bound by his former concepts of prayer Now let us see what happens. If any one of these represents your concept of God or Christ, that's what you're praying to. And you can see that it's no wonder you don't get an answer, because there isn't anything on this table that can answer your prayers. There isn't a thing here that can answer your prayers, and as long as you have in mind a concept, that's what you are praying to. Nothing else but your concept. There are people who have what we call very high concepts of God, and so they are just praying to a higher concept. It isn't God, and it cannot be God ever until you can wipe this table off and agree that regardless of which of these concepts is nearest to what I think of the religious ideal, or if you have some other that's closer than these, it still isn't it itself, God, nor can it be Christ. And Paul tells you what it is: a creature made by man. And he tells us that we should not worship the creature made by man. And you see, these are man-made images, whether they're physical or whether they are just mental in your mind. You created them. Now, of course, you know the old saying that if there wasn't in truth a God, man would make one for himself. Well, there is a God, but man still has made gods for himself. And almost everyone will agree that they have some concept of what God is. And by that very fact, they're separating themselves from God. This is the man who very wisely said, if you can name it, it isn't that. If you can think it, it isn't that. If you can have any concept of it, it isn't that. And regardless of what you have in thought as God, it cannot be that. Now, these symbols have a place, and a rightful place, in religious worship, because it makes no difference whether this is your concept and you have that on your dressing table or desk, or whether you have a picture hanging on the wall, something as beautiful as Hoffman's picture of the Christ. It has a rightful place if it will draw your attention to it at intervals, so that you can be reminded, yes, it's time for me to remember there is a God in my life. If it will point you to the fact that perhaps you haven't been remembering often enough, it has a place. Each of these at some time or other has been in temples or in private shrines. And it may be that some people have gone there actually praying to it in their ignorance. But from my travels and talks with people, I'm convinced that in their minds they realize, even though they set these up in a shrine and place a flower by it every day, or in some cases bring fruit to it each day, that actually they are doing it only in the sense that Hebrew Scripture says, "Thou wilt keep him in perfect peace whose mind is stayed on thee." Or again, Hebrew Scripture says, the Hebrew religion teaches that this scroll of the Ten Commandments must be affixed to the front entrance of the home of every Hebrew. And, of course, in the case of Orthodox Hebrews, you will find it there. Those that we call Reformed, like those mostly in America, don't even know of such custom. But in the old Orthodox teachings, and in foreign countries where there are religious Jews of the old school, you will find a little piece like this, larger sometimes, and sometimes made of tin, but containing a copy of the Ten Commandments, and it will be affixed to the front door of the home. And the purpose is to remind them on going out and coming in of the law, which of course is the nearest thing to the God, because obedience to this law is the same to them, obedience to the Ten Commandments is the same to them as obedience to God or Christ in other religions, or Buddha. Lean not unto thine own understanding. Acknowledge him in all thy ways. And so it is that as we have in our homes or on our walls some symbolic representation of a religious idea or ideal, it can serve to remind us that we must think of God and spiritual things more often, and turn us more often to our realization of God, our demonstration of God. But if it goes beyond that, to where we would accept any of these as really imaging forth God or representing that which God is, we would then lose our demonstration, because, first of all, regardless of what degree of spiritual illumination you may attain, you will still not have the fullness of the Godhead bodily as your demonstrated mind. Now, that doesn't mean that God the Infinite isn't your intelligence, but at no time in your career can you embrace that infinity, or you would be infinity itself. And therefore, any concept of God that you would entertain must be something less than infinity, since you cannot embrace infinity. Now, when you realize that, you come very close to being ready for the God experience. Certainly you will never come to it before you realize that there is no possibility of knowing God, and that regardless of what you have read or heard, what you may think you know about God, it cannot be that. In the Infinite Way, we talk a lot about the nature of God, and that's something quite different than talking about God. For instance, we do know the nature of God by the effect of God. In other words, after you have had God contact, you can know what the nature of God is by its effect upon you. But knowing the nature of God and knowing God, these are two different things. To prepare for the God experience, it is necessary in the earliest stages to close one's eyes and let us realize here and now, if I could name it, it isn't that. If I could think it, it isn't that, because all I can think is something less than myself, and certainly I am not that. Now, since I acknowledge that I, Joel, do not know God, and that with my thinking mind, my reasoning mind, I never can encompass God, or I'd be encompassing the infinite in the finite. Now, in acknowledgement of that, I open myself and say, Father, I cannot know you, but you can know me. I cannot encompass you, but you can encompass me. True, I and the Father are one, but the Father is greater than I. And that's a mystery that you understand with the very first God experience. I and the Father are one, but the Father is greater than I. Father, reveal thyself. Speak, Lord, thy servant heareth. And now, having completely cleared yourself of all concepts about God, all beliefs about God, all theories about God or superstitions, concepts, symbols, you learn to sit receptive, awake, alert, as if you actually expected God to walk right into your consciousness. And it isn't impossible. And that still doesn't mean that you will know God or be able to describe God, but you will be able to say, I have experienced God. I have felt the presence. I have felt the power. And you can know it by its effects. Now, in our work in the infinite way, this is a necessary step because it leads to some other steps which in their turn lead to the ability to heal. Because if I do not know God, and who can with this mind, and I agree to that, and I'm receptive, I will sooner or later receive or have an experience which will satisfy me that God has either spoken to me or revealed himself to me or made the presence and power available. There will never be any doubt once it happens, even though there may be a dozen near experiences before that which may make you say, now was that the experience? It probably wasn't. Because usually when it comes with such distinct force or power or gentleness or realization that you know it so, but you know it so thoroughly that it becomes sacred and you don't mention it, it's secret. If you find yourself talking about it, then be assured that wasn't it. Because nobody who has the experience would risk its loss by casting a pearl before swine, casting their greatest demonstration before the unprepared thought. No, there is nobody ever who has had that experience who will talk about it unless they find themselves in the company of others whom they know by the demonstration of their lives have also attained. In other words, as you travel here and there, you will recognize a mystic, or you will recognize a God-realized person. You won't have to speak to them, and they won't have to speak to you. Before you separate from them, there will be a look in your eyes and a look in theirs, and you will instantly identify yourselves, and then at that time or some other time, you'll find yourself in the position of exchanging experiences. But other than that, you could no more be tempted to talk about it than you could be tempted to talk about the most intimate details of your own life. Now, whether or not, or I should say, even before that happens, you have to take even a second step. For there is not only God, which is a mystery, there is the Christ, which is a mystery. We use the term the Christ in the Occident. In the Orient, they use the term Buddha, but it means the same thing. It means the Son of God, or the spiritually illumined. While in the Occident, our religious teachings are more or less to the effect that there's only been one Christ, in the Orient, they are a little more liberal in that, and acknowledge that there may be 100 Christs, if there are 100 who achieve illumination. So there is definitely more than one Buddha. And each one of these Buddhas has achieved, according to their scripture, full and complete illumination. Well, of course, you know that in our modern metaphysical teachings, every individual on the face of the globe potentially is Christ and may attain the fulfillment, the realization of it. And in the degree of the realization, they achieve that degree of Christhood. That doesn't mean that there may be many, if any, who have achieved the fullness of that Christhood which Jesus attained. But on the other hand, there's no use of limiting God and say that it hasn't happened or couldn't happen. For after all, it isn't man's demonstration, even when he achieves, or if he achieves full Christhood, it's God's demonstration. Should God reveal itself as the full Christ, that would be God's demonstration and not man's, and therefore no man could take credit for it. Now then, in the same way that we have done with God, we take the term the Christ, or the Son of God, or the real man, whichever way it appeals to you, and you go through the same process. I don't know what Christ is. I know it's a spirit. I know it is nothing physical. I know it's nothing finite, nothing limited to time or space, therefore I cannot encompass it in my mind, but I can experience it. And in the same way, with that type of contemplation and ultimately meditation, you will find, by emptying yourself of all concepts of the Christ, don't think of it as being Christian, don't think of it as being Mohammedan or Buddhist, think of it as an infinite, incorporeal, spiritual creation or emanation of God, the Son of God, the Christ of God, God's own selfhood unfolded, and then with no mental pictures, no concepts, hold yourself in that same state of receptivity. Illumine me. Open my eyes that I may see. Open my ears that I may hear. The Master says, do you have eyes and do not see? Do you have ears and do not hear? And the invitation is, come in. Sup with me. But this me is within you. The kingdom of God is within you. The Christ is within you. Not finitely within you, but within the activity and range of your consciousness. And while you can embrace it, to see it, hear it, taste it, touch it, or smell it, you can experience it, and in experiencing it, you may see some concept such as these, just as the Chinese has seen the Christ with a Chinese face and figure. And just as each one of these artists has seen the Christ outpictured as these particular figures, so may you. Or it may be an experience of light. Or it may be an experience of just awareness, a feeling of a presence. It may be a feeling of gentleness, compassion. Whatever it is, I caution you that it's sacred, therefore keep it secret. Don't speak of it. Don't tell your best friend. Don't tell your mother or your father or your sister or your brother. Because remember, nobody is at exactly your level of consciousness, and therefore they cannot be expected to see what you see or even believe what you actually know. I told you the story, didn't I, of the Persian mystic who loved his wife and thought she was so beautiful, boasted about it and told everyone about it, until one of his friends came and cautioned him, oh, don't talk so much about your wife. She isn't as beautiful as you think she is. And the mystic just answered, you can't tell how beautiful she is until you see her through my eyes. And you see, that's true. You can't even know if there's a Christ. You might blindly believe it, but you can't know it until you experience it. And it would make no difference who told you that they saw the Christ. You still couldn't believe it until you yourself had experienced it, for how can you believe that which you have no knowledge of? Now, that is a second point in our meditation, and it has another reason. When I look at you through my eyes, I cannot see you, and you cannot see me. I can only see a concept which has formed in me of you. And that may be so far different from what you are, or even what you look like, that there may be no relationship between the two. So that there isn't one of you who know what I'm like. All you have done is drawn certain conclusions based on what you've seen or heard or humanly experienced with me, but that isn't me. That is your particular experience, and for that reason, well, I'm not going to tell you how many different views of me there are in this room. But the point is that none of you are correct, because in my inner being, I'm really something that nobody understands. I'm the most misunderstood man in the world, according to me. But I'm sure that each one of you feel the same about yourselves. Oh, I wish he understood me, or she understood me, or I wish the world understood me. Nobody seems to know what I'm driving at, or why I'm living, or why I'm studying, or what I'm trying to accomplish. And it's true, because no one knows you. Each one has drawn a concept of you which they're entertaining and actually believing. And really and truly, if they could see into your heart, they know right well that they were far afield because they were limiting it to perhaps some one facet of you that they have seen or cognized. Now, the importance of that is this. If you ask me for help, I dare not think about you because it isn't you. It's just a very imperfect, finite concept of you. So I have to close my eyes. Father, who is this that's come to me? What's the truth behind all this? Here they come with this sad story of this, that, and the other thing, but I can't believe it. Now, what is the truth? What is the truth? You see, I'm not thinking of you. I'm not thinking of your problem. I'm just thinking of God. Who is this? What is this? What is presented to me? And I have had it happen many, many times, more especially when I was sitting with someone sick unto death, that the answer came within. Knowest thou not? This is my beloved child in whom I am well pleased. And when that happened, a healing took place. Because in that statement, their spiritual identity was revealed. I didn't see it or hear it or taste it or touch it or smell it. I cognized it. I was aware that the perfect image and likeness of God was right where this sick person or sinning person or dying person seemed to be. So it is. As you know from your studies, there can't be truth in sin, disease, or death. That means there'd be God in it. Because truth is God. God is truth. There can't be truth in it. But on the other hand, it does you no good humanly to say, oh, it isn't real. Oh, God didn't make it. That's all in the realm of more concepts, more finiteness, human opinion. But if you close your eyes to every appearance, judge not after appearances, judge righteous judgment, and you wait with the realization, Father, I know not how to go in or come out, I know not how to pray, or what things I should pray for. Pray thou in me. You will find that an answering response will come which will lift up your patient, your student, your group, sometimes yourself for your own experiences. One thing we must be careful of. No matter what you think of God, make the acknowledgement that cannot be it. God cannot be limited to anything you can think of it. Whatever you may think you know about Christ, acknowledge right away it can't be that. Christ cannot be limited to anything that we finitely can think about. And what is man? What does it say? What is man that thou art mindful of him? What is man that thou art mindful of him? We know it isn't a mortal because God isn't mindful of mortals. Mortals are born and they die. Mortals get sick. Mortals go to war and get killed. Mortals get cheated. Mortals have all kinds of horrible injustices. God is not mindful of mortals, but God is mindful of man. What is that man that God is mindful of? I can't answer you, but I can sit and listen until I feel the very presence of what spiritual man is and how spiritual man functions. Now, when you come to this, you will find why meditation is a way of life. It isn't really the way, but it's the way leading to the way, because through meditation you become aware of the way. And without meditation you never will. You never will You never will, with your mind, grasp anything of a spiritual nature. It takes a soul faculty. It takes spiritual discernment. And you can't develop spiritual discernment by reading books. If you take books and read them, more especially those with deep spiritual inspiration, just to lift yourself to a higher level of inspiration, and then close the book, close the eyes, and ponder what you have read. Take a statement of truth into your consciousness, or a question to God, then you will be developing your spiritual awareness. It isn't any different, actually, than developing the intellect. If you want to develop the intellect, you've got to read a lot, or you've got to practice a lot, you've got to think a lot. You can't grow an intellect just by reading a book and then going to sleep. There must be a practice, mental practices, whether it's with music, art, literature, or whatnot. Your mind has got to be alert and active, and you can develop yourself intellectually to whatever level you wish, and artistically, providing always you have some instinct for that. But so does spiritually. You can develop yourself spiritually, but not merely by reading or going to church, not merely by reading or going to classes, but by taking what you read, what you hear, and practicing statement by statement, step by step, until you get into an actual meditation where the senses have become silent. You haven't stilled them, heaven forbid. You've let them go on and do anything they want, knowing that they can't do anything to you anyhow. But your inner ear is open. Your inner recognition is, speak, Lord, thy servant heareth, for without that I will never know. Reveal thyself, or I will never know. I can't hope to figure it out by taking thought, by reasoning. Who by taking thought can accomplish anything of a spiritual nature? But by seeking the realm of the real within me, I ultimately reach a point in my meditation when a flow begins to come from the within to the without, and then it reveals all things that are necessary for us to know, that are good for us to know. The flow comes from within. This that we do with our mind, the reading, the studying, that is merely a preliminary step to the practice of it. You might liken it to a surgeon who goes to college and reads all about surgery and then makes no progress until he goes into the operating room and really starts operating, and then begins a practice and a continued practice until he becomes an adept at his work. So with this, you take into your laboratory, into your inner consciousness, the spiritual inspiration that you gain from spiritual reading. You take these statements that have come to us from spiritual masters or your spiritual teacher's experience, and you ponder, cogitate, contemplate, and always, if you look up here and select any one of these to look at, and after you first gaze at it to see what it physically is, then look behind it and say, now what does it mean? Just as I explained to you that this meant Lao Tzu sitting on a horse backwards, meaning he has conquered his 5 physical senses and he's now in control of them. But now you couldn't have told that by looking at the front here. But had you looked at it and pondered it and thought and said, well, now he's sitting backwards, he's on a horse and it looks like kind of lively one, and ponder, and then keep looking in back of it and back of it, very soon that very explanation would come to you. And you say, well, I never read it, but I can see that that is self-evident. And so it is. Here is a figure of our Tibetan teacher, and he sits there, and his fingers are like this. But I'm sure that the artist didn't do that way for no particular reason. I'm sure that everything that you see here has a reason that symbolizes something in the teaching. And it wouldn't take you long of looking at this then to let your gaze go behind it until you realized that that was the signal of complete achievement, fulfillment, attainment. There it is. That's it. Beyond that, there is nothing more. So it is. I know nothing of you, and so quickly I, looking back of you, you might say into nothingness or the void, and I ask the Father, what is the truth? What is the truth? And sooner or later there comes that inner realization, that inner feeling that tells me that unfoldment has come, realization has come, revelation has come, and I know that there's no sin, disease, death, lack, or limitation, or old age facing me, but the Son of God, and then out of that comes the response within you. Now remember this, because each one of you has something in the nature of a problem that is appearing to you as person or as place or as condition, circumstance. In no case is it really what it seems to be. In no case is it what it seems to be. And you could look at it with your mind forever and you would not solve it. But if you close your eyes to it and say, all right, Father, that's the appearance. What is the reality? What is the truth? You will find that something will come to you, whether in the nature of a vision or a message or a feeling, and that problem will dissolve. And the harmony will be there. You see, often we defeat that because not only we look at the problem, but we have a preconceived idea of how the problem should be solved, and so we look for the answer, and we lose it. No person knows, and no person ever can know, how a spiritual answer is to come. One thing is certain, it'll never come in the way that you expect it, because that would mean you were as good as God's mind, knew all about it in advance. No, the solution, unless you're looking for a human solution, the solution will come in a far different way than you expect, and yet, when it comes, it will seem to you to be normal and natural, only you'll know that you hadn't thought about it in advance. So then, I will say this to you, getting back to our lesson on mind forms its own conditions. Remember this, that the mind is forming your problem. And there are times when your mind might form an answer to your problem. But that isn't what you're seeking. You know that mind has formed the problem, but what you want is a higher capacity than mind. And so now sit without the thinking process and let your mind be an instrument through which the soul can reveal itself. In every problem, this is the way. Start every meditation or treatment with the realization, I don't know what God is, and I'm not going to try to picture it, I'm willing to let it come to me from within as I'm ready for it. I don't know what the Christ is or how it functions, any more than I know how to make a tree. But I do know that trees are made, and I do know that harmony is and can be experienced in my life if the same thing that makes a tree makes my demonstration. And so I'm listening inwardly. My inner ear is open, my inner eye is open. I'm receptive. Speak, Lord, thy servant heareth. And you will have the solution to your immediate problem that way. You will have the immediate answer to the true identity of the persons who at this time you are thinking of as humans, sometimes good and sometimes not too good. And in the same way, ultimately, you will have the experience of God. And you will know that it's an experience of God, although I'm sure that you will never be able to convince anyone of it. But when you meet someone who has themselves experienced God, they'll know that you have without your telling it to them. Because that is exactly as it is with masons. One mason always knows another, even if they don't wear jewelry. There's always something that gives it away, always something that reveals it. And so it is with this. It would be an impossibility to experience God and then not sooner or later meet someone else who would experience God and know it at the same time. This is an experience that I'll tell you that has nothing to do with knowing one who has experienced God, but just to show you how two people come to know each other. I was in a plane going from Cairo to Johannesburg, and there was several hours delay and down at the equator. And before boarding the plane, I stood at the table, with the ticket table, with another gentleman, and we said good evening and went through the process of being ticketed and went on in. Then went on the plane. We had different seats, so we didn't meet until several hours later when we came down for this engine trouble, and we sat there 6 hours, I guess, having Coca-Colas and sandwiches. Then on board the plane again and all the way down to Johannesburg. At each stop we spoke, hello, how are you, and so forth, but nothing further than that. At no time a conversation. Each time we went back to the plane, each to his own seat. Yet as we were getting close to Johannesburg, this man came over to me and said, "What hotel are you stopping at?" And I told him, and he said, "Do you mind if I phone you?" Without thinking, I said, "Why, no, not at all." And then I wondered why. But I did have a feeling, I hope he does. I like this man. Fine fellow. Sure enough, a few days later he phoned and said, "I would like you to come out to my home to dinner. My wife would enjoy it also. Will you accept this invitation?" And without thinking, I said yes. Now, I had not accepted an invitation in all of the time to go to anybody's home for a meal. And here I find myself saying yes to a perfect stranger, and then afterward wondering why. And Thursday came, the evening of the appointment. I met him downstairs. When I got in the car, I said, "I owe you an apology." "Why?" I said, "For accepting this invitation." I said, I'm afraid I'm going to be a very strange guest. And I don't know but what you may have other guests. "Oh, just another couple." "Oh," I said, "this is going to be very difficult for you." I said, "I might as well tell you now, I don't smoke, and I don't drink, and I know very little of the things that most people know everything about. And I'm apt to be a very, very uncomfortable guest. Oh, he said, no, I suspected that. He says, we don't smoke and we don't drink and we don't know much about anything except prayer. Prayer? Well, he said, you might call it prayer. We call it meditation. He says, I have a wife and 5 children, but he said, our life is lived in meditation. We are friends. Well, there you have it. Went out to that home, and the other couple were friends too, and we had just about as fine an evening, and a most wonderful friendship followed. And of course, it turned out that the lady of the other couple was the manager of a bookstore, which hadn't yet had my books. You see, out of a whole airplane load of people, 2 come together. And he said, of course, it didn't get by me that you didn't smoke on the trip and that you didn't accept any of the drinks on the trip. I said, I can swear I never noticed that about you. But you see, that's how it happens, and that's how it is, that on this path, sooner or later, invisibly or visibly, you meet your own. My own shall come to me, and it's true. But to seek to know the spiritual lights of the world is frustrating unless one has first achieved a measure themselves, and then the meeting is automatic and the sharing is automatic. But as you'll find, these experiences are sacred and they should be secret. Now let's take these 2 questions while we can. Would you please explain in your own words this statement? When we can look at a problem without running from it or struggling against it, this very problem ceases to exist. Now, most of you already know the answer to that, don't you? A problem can only exist in mind. But supposing you've closed your mind and you have no thoughts in it, now where's your problem? There isn't any. And in place of the problem, the truth, the reality, rushes in to take its place. Watch this. In the human world, you have 2 powers, good and evil. And always you are loving, fearing, or hating. Always you are pushing mentally, either to attract to you, or to get rid of, or to rise above, or to overcome. Of course, the longer you keep that up, the longer you're going to have something. Even if you get rid of one problem, 2 are going to come in and take its place. What was it the Master said about that? Be careful, you know, about getting rid of this problem. 7 more might come in. And so it is. If you force a problem out of your mind by willpower, you have to have 2 take its place or more. But now let us take this attitude. Here has come to me a terrible problem. I don't know what its nature is, but it's awful. Awful. I can't go through with it. And instead of being in this world and fighting it, I'm going to sit here and acknowledge that's the way it seems, Father. Oh, yes, it's terrible, terrible, terrible. That's the way it seems. Now, what is it? Now, you see, I'm not trying to meet that problem. I'm not trying to rise above it. I'm not trying to destroy it. I'm merely trying to sit here and understand, not understand the problem, but understand the reality behind the problem. And if I can be perfectly quiet and perfectly still, no attempt now to overcome, destroy, remove, escape. If I can attain that, the flood will come in, the flow of the Spirit, and there will be freedom. Now, if I can't, then I must turn to someone. If I am at a stage where the mind is whirly-whirly, and it won't settle down, and it's got me really afraid of this problem, or in too much pain, or one thing or another, and I realize I just cannot achieve that inner non-resistance. Always remember that I'm teaching you from the master statement, resist not evil. And I can't achieve that. There's something in me that wants a battle. There's something in me that wants to argue, something in me that wants to be afraid. Then I must find somebody in whom I have the utmost confidence, somebody who can attain that state of being in spite of any appearance. I must find them. And then if they will sit down, neither fearing the problem, hating the problem, certainly not loving it, but willing to be receptive, the Father will speak. It will come in. And then that one will say to me, it's all right, don't worry. It's taken care of. And in its due time, sooner or later, usually very soon, the problem disappears.